went out to Los Angeles with a beat up car and $700 in my pocket and really said yes to everything. It was super blessed. When you're a kid and you're dreaming about what that's going to look like, it's a lot different when you get into the belly of the beast. It was a really, really exciting journey. And I always say I loved it when I loved it. And when I was ready to move on, I was ready to move on. I was able to cross off every childhood dream, private planes, big rock star parties, backstage, all that kind of stuff.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Money School podcast. I'm your host, Chris Naugle, and this show is all about you taking back control, but not just taking back control. It's about you taking back control of your money. You may not know what that means now, but you will understand that by the time we're done here. And the main thing we teach is how to take back control by you being your own bank. But today, we're going to kind of flip the script. Today, my guest is a very unique guest, a little off the beaten path for other guests that I've had, which is why this is going to be so much fun. But let me just give you a couple accolades of him. First off, he was a Hollywood success story, and he ran a high-profile entertainment career. Just imagine working with high-profile musicians and rock stars and doing that, and the lifestyle that comes along with that. And then I want to talk to him and have him talk to you about that experience, because some of you are like, that'd be the dream job, but that came with a couple problems, and those problems resulted in a complete nosedive, a transition, some hard times, and then today he is renowned out there. One of the things I want to talk about, so he's a realtor and a broker, but one of the things I love is Breaking Bad. You've heard of that show? This is the guy that sold that house. We're going to talk about the Breaking Bad house. We're also going to talk about he's one of 200 people that actually was in a sub going down 12,800 feet. Think about that. You're on an airplane, you're up in the sky, and the point where the pilot says, your seatbelts, sign goes off, you can get up and walk around, it's about 10,000 feet. Yeah, add 2,800 feet. That's how far underwater he was. But my guest is right here, and we're going to dive into all of this. David Christensen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, my friend. Really good to see you. Really excited to be here today, my friend.
I'm excited to dive into this. So let's not waste any time. Listen, you live that rock star life. And, in light of everything that's happened, folks, this is being filmed right now, July 2025. We just lost, an iconic rock star, Ozzy Osbourne, and then Hulk Hogan, not just a day or two later. So what was that like working with rock stars at the level? And just talk a little bit about that for me.
Well, I started out as a small town kid. I mean, I grew up in a tiny, tiny town in New Hampshire, and my dream was always to, go to the big leagues. I thought I was going to be the next John Bonham, drummer or, rock star. And that's kind of where the impetus for that all started. And, I got to be about 25 and didn't want to sleep on floors anymore with, five guys and thought, well, maybe the business side of things would be more suited. So, classic story. I went out to Los Angeles with a beat up car and $700 in my pocket and just really said yes to everything and was super blessed, made a lot of good friends, met a lot of people, was in the right places at the right time. And over the course of the 15, 20 years I was in that business, we managed music artists. We had some hit records. We worked for some of the major labels. And, I think when you're a kid and you're dreaming about what that's going to look like, it's a lot different when you get into the belly of the beast. It's super high pressure, just like a lot of people's careers are right now, super high pressured, moves really fast. And I think the big takeaway for me was, celebrities are just human beings too, and they struggle with all the things that we struggle with, fear and anxiety and desire to do right by their jobs and right by their families, but they're doing it on a stage in front of everybody, and so that just kind of adds an extra layer of anxiety and stress. And when I was deep in the business, it was right before the expansion of social media. So, they were kind of on the cover in different ways. Paparazzi was a big thing and all that type of stuff. And so, it was a really, really exciting journey. And I always say I loved it when I loved it. And when I was ready to move on, I was ready to move on.
I got to imagine, working in that capacity, working as close as you did, you maybe like had some fun and like got to go to some of those parties, those ones that we only see in the tabloids, right? Like, was that
Yeah,
part of the job?
for sure. I mean, again, I was able to cross off every childhood dream, private planes, big rock star parties, backstage, all that kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, it was phenomenal. I loved it. But you get to a point in your life where it becomes just like any job. It becomes routine, and you got to remind yourself why it is that we're doing what we're doing and focus on the prize. But I was very blessed to have all the, textbook rock star experiences for sure.
That's pretty awesome. So I'm sure all of you listening and maybe watching this, you're thinking to yourself, that would be freaking awesome. And I'm thinking the same thing. I was a pro snowboarder, and I'll
Yeah.
cross off the private plane and those different things because like snowboarders just didn't make that. But I slept on plenty of floors. I had those rock star parties, and just like was at the top of the world. But as like just about everything in life, all good things come to an end. And mine came to an end out in California. Overshot a big jump, and that was it. Never made my comeback. So I got to ask you, like, why did it end?
I think for me, if I'm totally transparent, what happened was I got everything that I could have possibly dreamed of. On paper, my life looked amazing. I had artists that people recognized. I was making good money. I had all those bells and whistles we talked about. And I was just absolutely shattered and empty. It was that kind of juncture moment that we have in life sometimes. Some of us have it when we're 25 and some of us don't have it till we're 50. But I had that moment in my early 40s where I went, I just feel absolutely empty. And unfortunately for me, but like a lot of people, to alleviate that stress, to alleviate that feeling of emptiness, I turned to alcohol because I thought it would kind of numb some of that pain I was going through. And for me, I turned out to be, a tried and true alcoholic. So that just really very rapidly changed the trajectory of my life. And, for a lot of years, I didn't really talk about it. It wasn't something that I wore on my sleeve. But I think now that I'm, almost 15 years sober, I'm on the other side of it. And I think, a lot of people struggle with those type of things. I think we have a much different view of alcoholism and drug addiction now than maybe we did 20 years ago. And I think people are much more open to kind of raising their hand and saying, hey, you know what, this was a challenge for me or somebody in my family. And so, yeah, I'm very transparent about it, but it came to a screeching halt. And I had to remove myself from that situation to kind of start the process of rebuilding and figuring out, what was the real why, because the private plane and a platinum record certainly was not the why, because had it been, I would have felt amazing, right? I would have felt fulfilled and joyful and all those things that we hope for. And that just wasn't the case.
Yeah, well, I can relate to that. I don't talk about this a lot. And, kind of like you, I grew up with a father who was an alcoholic, and, being the boy or the teenager who got to see that from the other side, it's a very hard thing to really get through. And I still struggle with it. I know when I was snowboarding, obviously we partied a lot, we drank a lot, and I never did any drugs, thank God. But, I definitely drank a lot. And there was not a day, like when I'd wake up with a hangover, there wasn't a day that I was like, oh my God, I don't want to be like my dad. And that's sad for me to say today. My dad beat alcoholism just like you. So I want to give a big congratulations, because I know a lot of people don't. You're on the other side, 15 years. My dad's on the other side, but it took my dad almost dying. Literally, my dad pretty much did die before he came out of it, but he's been sober a long time. So, to all of you listening to this podcast, if you come from a family, that had an alcoholic, or if you were an alcoholic, just know there's a whole other side. And I know many of you are on that other side. Some of you might be fighting the demons, but just push and make the mark to get to that other side. Because I've seen it from my dad's side. He's a different person. It's like, I sometimes don't even know my dad now that he's not an alcoholic, which is actually sad, but that's all I knew is
Sure.
dad, drinking beer. That was it. So, the nosedive there, you turn to it because of the emptiness that you had. And, you came out, you got on the other side of it, which I know is never easy, but like what happened next? I know, you were doing, let me kind of just get this right, because I don't want to get this wrong from your bio here, but you were a media director for the renowned Titanic expedition, which I think everybody listening to this, you remember the Titanic expedition, but that took you 12,800 feet under the ocean. And you're one of only 200 people to have ever done that. Now, I gave you the context, folks, of the airplane, but let me give you another context. Me and David were talking offline before we got started. I live in a community where there's a rock quarry that back, in the late 20s, they hit a spring and they left for the weekend. They came back and all their equipment was underwater. And this rock quarry is about 800 feet deep. So that, for a lake, that's a really deep lake. 800 feet. And I was talking to a guy, he's a firefighter, who they do some scuba diving training. And he said they went down 600 feet. And I said, oh my God, what'd you see? So I swim this lake and it's crystal clear, literally, like you could see everything. Like you open your eyes when you're swimming and, there's some parts where it's just completely black, but like if it's, 20 feet deep, you could see the bottom. So I said to him, what did it look like? He said, well, I don't know. I didn't see anything. I said, I was just going off of feel. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, at 600 feet, light doesn't get down that far. You can't even see it. So now let's put that into context. That's 600 feet. Yeah. David, you were 12,800 feet. Tell me.
2.5 miles. It's pretty deep for sure.
Just insane. Any of you ever run 2.5 miles? Like, you're pretty out of breath. Like, it's a long run. Like, that's how far underwater he was. I can't believe they have subs that don't just compact under that pressure. But let's go from David, being empty, finding alcohol, beating alcohol, to now you're 12,800 feet underwater. How did that happen?
So when I was in Los Angeles and kind of realizing that I needed to, reinvent myself, a good friend of mine, and this always sounds crazy because you can't really just drop this at a cocktail party. It just sounds ridiculous, right? It's so funny how many people don't know that I've dove Titanic, because you can't just drop it casually, right? A good friend of mine was actually involved in the discovery of Titanic. His father was involved in some groups in the 80s that had raised money and searched for it. And so when the Titanic was discovered, my good friend G. Michael Harris, he actually secured the salvage rights to Titanic. And so Glenn Ballard had the win and was able to plant the flag as the guy who discovered it. But G. Michael Harris and his team were able to secure the salvage rights. And so if you've ever seen a Titanic museum, if you've ever gone somewhere and the Titanic was kind of touring the country with artifacts and things like that, or some of these permanent museums, that's what my good friend did. And so kind of at the tail end of my music career, he was putting together an expedition to go back out to Titanic. And it was one that hadn't been done in a long time. We were actually the last expedition for about 20 years out at Titanic. And he said, look, I really want to take this, reinvent this, bring it back to the public. He was bringing his son on the dive. And he said, I'd like to hire you as the media director. Can you help kind of put all that together? And as part of that, I'll have you dive the ship so that you can speak eloquently about the experience. And so that's really how that came together. And so I went to L.A., from L.A. to Orlando, Florida, and worked with them to put that dive together. And it was an amazing experience. I tell people all the time, the opportunity to see that. I was a huge Titanic fan. I'm like every other kid, that saw the National Geographic in 1985 and sat there just, bug-eyed as you're kind of doing this search of that. And I watched the movie and all that. And so to have the opportunity to go down and see it was unbelievable. And
was it kind of eerie? Like when you first got a glimpse of it, was it that kind of like your hair on your arm stand up a little bit?
Absolutely. So it's about a 2.5-hour journey to get down there. So you're in a sub. If you've ever seen the movie Titanic, the first 15 minutes of the movie that's in modern day where they're showing the ship and the sub, that's all real. That's the actual Russian Keldysh. Those are the Russian Mir submersibles. Most of the people in that film, other than the main actors during those scenes, are the real Russian sub pilots. So it's a really good, accurate kind of feeling of what it's like. And it's complete darkness on the way down. And then you get to the bottom and you put the floodlights on, and it's almost indescribable to imagine, landing on the seabed and seeing the, bow of the Titanic in front of you. It's just unbelievable. But, I will say something. One of the things I've said many times is that as amazing as that journey was, and I was blessed to be able to see the whole Titanic, the sub, kind of we were on the seabed, I think about 8 hours. So I got to see the whole ship. The most kind of impactful part of it was not being under the ocean. The most impactful part was being on the ship on the surface at night and imagining that you were at the exact longitude and latitude that Titanic was when it sank, and you were looking at the same stars and the same water, and to be on that ship on the surface and to kind of look around and go, wow, this is where those lifeboats would have been. This is where, these people just so unfortunately lost their lives, was much, much more moving than I could have imagined. I mean, really, it took my breath away. And every night we kind of had a moment of silence and reflection, because we were there doing work, but clearly, a very tragic event and super powerful.
This is completely off basis, but I've been seeing a lot more. It's kind of like, with all the stuff that's coming out, JFK files, the Epstein files, whether or not they ever come out or not, and all these things that are kind of being revealed to us, Martin Luther King files. There are all sorts of conspiracy theories about the Titanic. Sure. And that whole era, when that happened, was when the Fed was trying to get off the ground. Like there were JP Morgan and some of the big bankers, were pushing toward a central banking system, which now we know as the Fed. And, there was 3 extremely wealthy, including the wealthiest man in the world, was on that ship. And there's a lot of conspiracies about, the fact that the ship was switched with its mirror ship, and that it was kind of sunk. Did you, when you're out there, was there anyone that mentioned anything about this conspiracy of like, this is maybe something that could have happened?
Not in particular, but, being around Titanic and being with people that were ridiculously smart and knew the ship, to the nth degree, and knew the whole societal system at the time, certainly were aware of some of those conversations and some of those thought processes. And I guess you certainly, it's not unimaginable to link the dots and go, that could have happened. I guess my only pushback would be that, so brutal to, lose, all those lives over those, three individuals. There was probably a lot more strategic way to do that if that's what you wanted to do. But certainly I can see how that would make sense from kind of a cultural, banking perspective at the time.
I think the hardest thing, and the biggest conclusive evidence was the way that when the Titanic, and we all watched the movie, with Leonardo, when the ship goes down and it breaks in half. Yeah. There's been so many scientists and so many people that understand structure saying that's physically impossible. There had to have been some internal explosion that would have broke the ship in half like that. I think that's the biggest thing, but I don't want to spend any more time on that. It's just like one of those.
We could do a whole episode on that. We'll do a sidebar.
You're the only person I know that's seen the Titanic, so I just figured, what the hell? Like,
no,
just ask if you ever heard about that. All right, so let's get back into this. After we go down our little rabbit hole about the Titanic. So now you're very well known across the entire circuit with eXp Realty, and as one of the top brokers out there. Like, how did you go from managing the talent that you did to going down to the Titanic to now you're selling real estate? I mean, at the end of the day, let's talk a little bit about that. And then I want to take this, and just so everybody knows, because I know at this point some people are like, oh, I don't want to hear about, a realtor and this, but we're not going to just talk about that. We're going to talk about something almost every one of you has to go through, and it's a transition of life. It's just like David's story where he transitioned, and we're getting to that point. Well, all of you, or many of you on here, you have transitioned from one thing in your life to the next, and that transition has been difficult. It's been fought with people telling you that you're stupid for doing it, that it's not a good decision. There's financial struggles that comes along with that. There's cultural struggles that come along with that. Well, those are the things I want to hyper focus on here. But David, you went through this transition at a hard period of time in your life. How did you land where you are? And then let's take that to what you're doing today.
Sure. So, after the Titanic and how kind of everything had fallen apart, I really had to I said it earlier, I had to figure out, well, what was the why? What was it that was going to make me fulfilled? And, I got to give kudos to my dad. My dad was a B-52 pilot and a super smart guy. And when I was trying to figure out how do I reinvent myself, he said to me, it's not about career, it's about skill set. And he said, what skill set did you have that made you successful as an entertainment executive? What skill set did you have that allowed you to offer some value to the people at Titanic, right? And I had some very good friends back in New Hampshire, which is where I grew up, and who were very, very successful in real estate. And so I decided that I was going to come home and rebuild my life around family, around a more calm lifestyle. I had nephews at the time, and my parents were getting older. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to reboot this entire life, right? Separate of just the career. I'm going to reboot my life, and I'm going to get grounded, and I'm going to surround myself with people that have just different thought processes, a little bit more calmer, as cliche as that sounds, but, a little bit more small town, right? And again, super blessed. You can never take credit for it all yourself, but I met a phenomenal woman and built a great family. And in that moment, I was talking to, friends that were very successful in real estate. And we kind of walked through and we said, okay, here's the things that made me successful in entertainment, right? It was about building trust, building rapport, seeing a vision, being able to tell a story, right? It's all about storytelling in the entertainment industry. And it was about storytelling with Titanic. And I thought that's what real estate is. At the end of the day, right, we're building relationships with people. And certainly when we're on the sell side, we're telling a narrative, we're telling a story. And how can we bring these houses to market in a way that's maybe a little bit different, a little bit sexier, a little bit more story-oriented than kind of just the run-of-the-mill approach. And so on the surface, it just really seemed like a good fit. And so I dived in, I got my license, and again, total transparency. I didn't tell a soul I was doing it for a year because I thought, well, what if I'm horrible? What if I'm horrible at it? I kind of wanted to still keep my relationships in other fields going, and it just worked really well. I remember I called a colleague of mine who managed Fleetwood Mac and worked with Motley Crue, and big manager. And I said to him, I just closed my first deal. I just sold my first house. I was on the listing side. And I said, it was exactly like getting an artist a record deal. I don't mean kind of like it. I mean exactly. I met with the artist, which was the seller. We talked about the product, which was the home, just like the demo or the record. We talked about what was special about this house. What were we going to do to make an audience care about this particular property, right? How are we going to bring it to market? No different than when I was managing a band and trying to kind of put all the bells and whistles together and figure out what was the target audience. How are we going to bring it to the market in a way that was special? And so I just literally applied everything I did in that career to it. And at the end of the day, it sold. Everybody was happy. And I said the only difference was that, you worked for 60 days and you got paid. In the music business, you could work for 3 years on a project and, nobody bought the record. So it was just a really nice transition.
Your real estate business lives and dies by the network and the connections that you make. I mean, after all, your network, well, it's your net worth. That's what you always heard, right? If that's an area where you desire improvement, well, Private Money Club, it's for you. PMC saves you precious time and money by bringing the real estate world, well, right to you, right in the palm of your hand. So get in on the action like so many others have by going to privatemoneyclub.com and sign up. Well, one of the things you said there that I really want to hyper focus on is you were talking about how you didn't tell anybody about this career change. Now, I think that's fantastic because you know darn well what happens when you start telling people about something you're just getting into. They always try to talk you out of it. They I read a lot of Earl Nightingale, and he talks about this a lot, the 5% and the 95%, the conform versus create mentality. And, everybody seems to want to get you to conform to their way of thinking, to their ideologies, to their, sometimes failed dreams. And you didn't. You just kept your mouth shut. You went around it, and then you got that dopamine hit on that first sale. And you're like, this is amazing. And you know what? I talk about this all the time. And I love that. That dopamine hit comes with every industry. And some of you are like, I don't get that at my job. Well, you're just in the wrong career. Maybe
Agreed.
you should really consider finding something that gives you that dopamine hit. In snowboarding, like when I won or hit a big jump or just anything, you got, to a massive contest, you got those dopamine hits. Well, when my career ended, those were over and I went into depression. And then I found those dopamine hits in the strangest place of all. It was coaching. I started coaching a snowboard team, and when they started winning and I'd watch my team, these kids up on the podium, I got that dopamine and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm helping them live their dream the way I used to, and I'm getting an even bigger dopamine hit. And then just with everything. So along with what you did there, you just kept it to yourself until you had that moment where you could be like, I got this. But like, how many years ago was that you had that first sale of that house?
So I'm just coming up on my 9th year. So that was about 9 years ago.
So 9 years, correct me on my numbers, but I'm just reading off this, 400 homes ago, and you're a luxury realtor, so you're dealing in nicer homes, but you had a major home run, okay, where you got global headlines, not just national headlines, not just, New England headlines. You got global headlines when you were part of the team that sold the Breaking Bad house. Now, I hope all of you listening to this have seen Breaking Bad, epic series, epic, just totally epic. And you got to tell me about this. Like, what was that like? So how did you even get that opportunity? First off,
great question. So just to start off, for some clarity, we are still in negotiations on the sale part of it, but we have brought it to market. I tell my kids all the time, say yes to things, be open, keep relationships current, even if you're not in the mode of something that you can see as a direct connection at that immediate time, right? Those relationships are valuable, right? And I had a business relationship with a guy named Ryan Johnston when I was in the entertainment industry, and we did a lot of deals together and just kept a really good working relationship, even when I got into real estate. Well, he so happened to live in Albuquerque and was very good friends with the owners of the Breaking Bad home. And they had talked to him for years about the fact that at some point they were going to sell the property. And he was always very kind and said, look, when you do that, I have the realtor that I think can combine, some expertise in entertainment with, the real estate side of things. And so he brought me in. I think we started the dialogue, last fall, and I flew out there a couple times and met with him. We talked about strategy and what we wanted to try to do. And, that's how it came together. And it's been an exciting process. We've really looked at that property as not a home because totally, to be frank, as a home, it's a beautiful, 3-bedroom ranch. It's worth $400,000 as a home. What the value in is as a cultural icon. That house gets about 300 cars a day sometimes of people driving by. And I saw it myself, so it's no hype. I mean, I literally took multiple meetings in that home and just car after car, people getting out, taking pictures. And so the way we brought it to market was, this is not about a young family of 5 buying a ranch. This is about somebody coming in and doing an Airbnb and a museum so that the value is really there at the price point that we've been talking about. And we've got a lot of interest. We're deep in discussions with the city of Albuquerque because there's some variances that we've got to pull together and working on getting sign off from the neighborhood to make sure that they're comfortable with us doing that with the property. But I feel confident it's going to come together, and hopefully in the next month or two, we'll have an announcement as to what that's going to look like. But really fun project.
That is freaking awesome. Now, another thing in what you do, you bring a lot of other people that were in a former business or different industry altogether, and you bring them over into this. You help them with that transition. Can we just spend a few minutes talking about that part of what of the business and how you're helping show other people how real estate could be a career path?
Absolutely. I got to say, I loved what you said, Chris, about the dopamine rush that you got when you started to get into coaching. And I can tell you, nothing has felt as good over these last couple of years of my life as the coaching and mentor aspect of it. I mean, it gives me a high that no deal gives me at all, because I remember so clearly being 25 or 27 and having no idea how it was all going to work out, and just wanting so desperately to have somebody who would walk the walk before me that might, shed some type of insight. I'm a huge Tony Robbins guy, and he used to always say, success leaves clues. And so I was always a big believer in trying to find that. And so I love that part of my job. And so it's been twofold. One, I have a boutique agency right here in New Hampshire and Maine and Mass, where I do a lot of my business, and, agents that I work with on the daily in terms of building their business and how to do things. And then on a larger scope, I've built an organization of about 100 agents throughout EXP, where just from an attraction standpoint, saying, hey, look, every real estate agency is great. I am absolutely not a guy that's going to say other real estate agents aren't good, or agencies aren't good. They're phenomenal, and there's a right fit for everybody. But I've been able to have a really growth spurt in what I'm doing, and I've loved the process of touring the country and meeting with other agents and just saying, hey, here's another option that you might want to look at that gives you some ownership in a different way than the classic model. And that's been a really, really fun part of what I'm doing, in addition to, selling houses.
So what do you find the best transition strategy to be? Like when you're talking to somebody and they're in whatever industry they're in or whatever job they're in, and you're showing them this opportunity over there where they might be coming, and this is, I think, where I really want to go. There might be W-2 wage, right? They're used to the 9 to 5. They're used to a paycheck. They're used to trading an hour for a specific dollar amount, which is what most people are traded. And just so you all know, that is absolutely never going to get you where you want to be if you trade your time for money. But in your field, what you do and what, all realtors do, you're paid for the value you bring to the hour. You're paid a commission. And if you don't go out there and sell, if you don't go out there and perform, you make nothing. And that is a complete culture shift. It's a mindset shift. It's an everything shift. So how do you find it best for somebody from that mindset to transition into the world that you're in now, where it is literally, you go out and you add value to the hour, not get paid by the hour?
You said it perfectly, and you said it brilliantly the other day in your webinar, right? It is about the value that you bring to that hour, right? And so the first thing that I try to do is listen. Again, as cliche as it sounds, we sometimes get so focused on the selling part that we actually haven't listened to where this person is coming from. What is their internal story? What is their clock? What is it that they've come from, right? Because if we start with the pitch or what we think is the benefit, and it doesn't align with them, then right out of the gate, we've gone separate ways. So I really try to get a sense of where they're coming from. Mindset, number one. It is all about mindset. We talked about, why didn't I tell everybody on the planet via a social media post that I was getting into real estate? Because I wanted to control the narrative. I wanted to be able to control the language that I was hearing. I knew that there was going to be fear. I knew that there was going to be challenges, and I wanted to be in control of what was being said to me. And so one of the first things I do is I listen to where they're coming from. I really love the concept of reverse engineering, right? So many people, even people that are successful, they don't do the reverse engineering. They don't say, okay, where do I really want to be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, right? So as hard as they want to work, as lazy as they're not, right? They're just good go-getting people. If you don't have that marker of where you want to be, and then you kind of rewind to figure, well, how are we going to get there? It's almost an impossible task. So, it's almost like a research mission that I'm doing in the first place, and then talking about protecting that mindset. And there's really I'd love it if there was one answer for everybody, right? But everybody is built a little different. I will say it's not impossible, but it's definitely harder when you're working with somebody that's maybe had a 20-year career or 10-year career in a 9 to 5. I have a lot of times where accountants or attorneys will call and say, hey, I'd like to get into real estate. I think I'd be really good. It's not that you wouldn't be good, but the fact that you were an accountant or a realtor or an attorney doesn't make you good, right? What makes you good is, can you build rapport with people? Can you build trust with people? Can you look at yourself as an entity? I think one of the biggest challenges, and maybe you see this when you're, coaching people, is that if you've come from a 9 to 5, you've never looked at yourself as a business, right? And I think one of the biggest mistakes sometimes people make in real estate is they think, okay, I'm going to be a realtor, and now I'm going to go to Remax or EXP or Clearwater or Coldwell Banker, and they're going to give me business. I'm now an employee of Coldwell Banker, and they get frustrated. Why isn't the phone ringing? Why am I not getting leads? And I've become a little bit more direct in my old age, where I have to say, that's the number one thing. If you're going to try real estate, you are absolutely an entrepreneur. You're your own business. All of these companies are nothing more than a beautiful logo and E&O insurance, right? You are still in charge of building the beast, And I think, that's the thing that I try to instill and try to find that little nugget in somebody that has that and just maybe didn't have the opportunity yet or didn't have the guidance or the village around them to help achieve that.
All right. So now we're going to go into, folks, we're going to kind of go into a bonus round here. And I'm just going to throw us both off because this is going to be the part where maybe David doesn't like me as much because I'm going to kind of really just kind of sink my teeth into this conversation. So okay. I've been in real estate since 2006. And, we had our show on HGTV. I've dealt with lots and lots of realtors, but I've never seen anything like the industry you're in, more than I have now, with the sheer amount of realtors that there are out there fighting for the same business. Since COVID, it just seems like that the name realtor or broker has just been like I don't know what it is. Everybody jumped into it after COVID because obviously real estate was nutty and it just seemed like you could just cast a line. You always got a bite on every house, but that's changing. But there are so many realtors. Most of them suck. No disrespect. Don't take that the wrong way. But most of them are absolutely fucking horrible at what they do because they don't make it a career. It's not their primary. It's a secondary or even a tertiary thing. It's just a hobby. But yet we'll call them the hobbyist. Why does the industry not do something to make the standard higher or the barrier of entry higher for someone to enter this field so that you don't have these, I don't know what you want to call them. I would call them squatters.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm sure I'm going to ruffle some feathers. I'm on the board of directors. That's what I'm trying to do. I don't like being nice by podcast. I'm in the belly of the beast. I'm on the board of directors here in New Hampshire, and I see it, and I am frustrated continually that the barrier of entry is almost non-existent. Let's be totally clear. A 40-hour online course gets you your real estate license. If you want to cut hair, that's an 1,800-hour course and a 2-year apprenticeship, right? And you're handling somebody's biggest investment. And I think two things happened. I think one, during COVID, there was a lot of people that were working from home, losing their jobs, sitting there going, well, crap, for 40 hours online and $412, I can become a real estate agent. And for 4 years, you could be an awful agent. Unfortunately, it was like shooting.
You're right.
It was shooting fish in a barrel, and it was offensive because we saw just the sloppiest of work. I think what we're seeing now, and I think for realtors that make it a full-time job and are in the more top producer category, it is a blessing because what we're seeing is a massive exodus of realtors, right? All those realtors that came in during COVID that thought it was easy and just opening a door, give me a $10,000 check, are realizing that it is not the case anymore. You have to be skilled to stay afloat. But I am a firm believer that we should have higher standards to get into the business and then higher standards to stay in the business. Again, in terms of continuing ed, we have some of the lowest requirements on the planet. So, when I hear the line from somebody, I've been a realtor for 20 years. That doesn't make you a good realtor. You could have been a bad realtor for 20 years. And again, I'm not trying to throw my colleagues under the bus, but one of the reasons we have this pushback from the consumer. I mean, I don't think I knew this at the time. If I had known this, I don't know if I'd have become a realtor. I think, as most hated professions or most distrusted professions, it's like attorney, used car salesman, realtor. I think we're like all fighting.
I don't know. Realtors are probably challenging the used car buyer or used 100%. Car salespeople now. I got to believe 100%. They are. They're trying to take number two.
Absolutely. And I know that every meeting that I take, that first 5 minutes is me doing everything I can to try to very rapidly restructure the narrative. you know? So I couldn't
All right.
agree.
So
with
now,
you more.
now let me hit one more thing that's kind of funny, and this is just personal observation, but there must be something in the coursework to become a realtor that says when you sell your first house, you take 110% of the proceeds of the sale, maybe 120. You go out and buy the fanciest shoes, the fanciest bags, the fanciest clothes, and also make sure you lease that really expensive Beamer, Mercedes, or some other exotic car because you're a success. Like, what in the world is it? Listen, I'm in the money space, but
Yeah.
I also see like you. I'm in in the belly. I see the thing no one else sees. I see the struggles people are having, and when you see them on the outside, they look like they look rich. They look
Yeah.
wealthy.
Yeah.
But then you peel the onion, not even all the way, and you're like, holy shit, what happened here?
Yeah.
You are buried in credit card debt. You can't afford this car. You're gonna lose your house. And but yet you got Gucci and Prada all over here. Like, what gives? Like, is there something that I don't know about that basically says that if you're going to be a realtor, this is the mandate?
I think part of the challenge is I don't think it's only realtors that suffer that. I think
No,
social
it's not. It's
media,
financial advisors.
but I
It's
think
everything.
social
But
media has put a scenario together where every coach that I talk to and every program that I talk to is about video and social media and putting yourself out there. And I think there's a pressure that the only way my client is going to know that I'm real is if I show up in the whatever car. And look, I literally drove an 8-year-old Subaru for the first, 4 years of my gig because I was a firm believer that I had to take that profit, invest it back. But I can tell you, it was a struggle every month where I wanted to go out and buy the big fancy car. And now I'm blessed to have that, but the financial situation is different. I think culturally, there's a balancing act that needs to happen where it's about skill versus impression. And I think because getting impressions is in theory a lot easier, right? Anybody can have their own YouTube channel. Anybody can have an Instagram, a TikTok, and they can go kind of get all the bells and whistles. And on the surface, look like you say that they're doing great stuff. It's not sustainable. I think anybody that's really trying to build a business in this career or any career field, delayed gratification, self-discipline, it's the key. You know what I mean? It's like I have a coach that says, self-discipline equals self-love. And I believe that, right?
absolutely.
And a shout out to
Faith
Chris
in
Johnson
yourself.
for that.
I'll add faith in yourself. 'Cause if you
100%.
don't have faith in yourself, you can't get where you want to be.
Because there's a difference between walking the walk and projecting yourself and burying yourself in debt with a $2,000 a month car payment because you think you need to show up in the Mercedes,
Oh, well, I just had to get that off my chest. Thank you for
Yeah.
handling that question because that could have went two different ways.
No,
All right, now we're going to finish this episode up with some things that I think you're going to probably be the perfect person to ask. Having PMC, Private Money Club, and in the business I'm in, I see trends, and I see them before most people do, and I am seeing some really scary trends in real estate right now. I would almost call them cleansing trends, where you're seeing in the Sunbelt states first, you're seeing these housing prices come down, and there's no secret. Right now, I think I just saw something the other day. The average person, in order to buy a home in most parts of the United States, need a net worth of about $400,000, or renters are $10,000. Like it's so unaffordable to own a home that it's almost the end of the American dream of home ownership. So something has to happen, and it's either got to be price correction or people need to make more money or something, and that's probably the latter is not going to happen. So are you seeing that in the next year, 2 years, we are going to start seeing more softening in pricing? That's part one of the question. Part two, I think real estate investors and real estate developers completely missed the mark. And I have gotten beat up year over year by mortgage brokers when I told them that, listen, the real estate market is going to soften. I don't care how much demand, you guys got it wrong. And what they got wrong is there's a massive need for housing, but nobody looked at what housing there was a need for, and it was always affordable housing. But yet developers, and the stats don't lie, I did a podcast and a YouTube on this, there is such a discrepancy between luxury apartment complexes and luxury apartment units versus affordable apartment complexes being built. Same thing with housing. There is such a sway to the higher end, housing versus the lower priced housing that is just not sexy. But yet that's what people need. That's what the country needs. That's what the U.S. needs, is affordable housing. Yet we have a massive supply, and most of the supply isn't even fully finished in luxury. Like, I know where this goes, but I want to hear your take on what you think is coming, because there's only one way through this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything that you said is a perfect 30,000 foot view. It is happening. Do I think there is going to be a market crash like we saw in 2000?
Absolutely not, because there's not a systemic risk in banking.
When I look at the numbers and talk to my colleagues, and there's nothing that indicates that. Do I believe that there's absolutely going to be a continued softening? Yes, there's just no way around it. I mean, again, 5 years ago, an entry level house was 300 grand. That same entry level house now is $550,000. So at some point, my daughter just bought her first home, and it was painful, to watch them try to do, what young people used to be able to do. So I think there's absolutely going to be a softening. I think also sellers are going to have to show up with better homes and better presentation. I think, a lot of sellers got very lazy and lucky during the COVID years when anything sold. Right now, buyers are saying, hey, look, if I'm going to pay 6.75% interest, I'm not buying anything. I now have some choices. I now have some ability to make better informed decisions. So I think that's also going to change the tempo. And we're seeing that completely, where things used to go on and off the market in 4 or 7 days. Now we're seeing the 50 and the 60 days. We're seeing the price reductions. The conversations are much different with sellers nowadays. But one of the things that I see happening, and I hope that this is a positive in the trend, because I agree with you. I'm in luxury real estate, but I think we've overbuilt in the wrong space, right? I'm in 100% agreement. Is that many communities, certainly here in New Hampshire and Mass, we are rewriting the laws and relooking at variances so that we can do accessory dwelling units, so that we can make multi-generational family homes more available. We're doing things that allow for these lower income or more affordable housing to be built without the stigma that sometimes that language gives it, because it offends me to no end when people have a judgment or call it low income housing. I mean, at the end of the day, you could be making $100,000 a year and still be backed into a corner in terms of what you can afford, right? And so I think part of it is removing the stigma, providing housing that is affordable and appropriate, and loosening some of those variance laws in communities so people can look at this multi-generational living. I got to tell you, in the last year, I've sold more houses that were multi-generational or were bought because families were combining. And that's even in the luxury space. Somebody was upgrading to a luxury place because they had a guest house, right? Or the parent where maybe 5 years ago would have stayed living on their own, helped their child buy the big estate so that they could have the guest house, right? And so I think you're seeing a lot of these type of unique, creative ways to solve the problem.
Yeah, no, and I kind of love seeing that, because it brings that family unit back together.
Yes.
And we're kind of course correcting back to that because of the unaffordability of housing. Like, I'm all for that. I love that. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch this happen. It's happening right now, folks. You're starting to see it. You're seeing it, in a big way in the Sunbelt states. And you're definitely, if you're a real estate developer owning those luxury units, you know exactly what's going on, because your vacancies are sitting double digits and you're sitting there going, oh no, what do I got to do? Well, you got to price it so that it can fit the demand. And right now we have a little bit of an off-kilter balance going on, and that's got to shift back. So, David, this has been amazing. If people want to learn more about joining your team, or they want to learn more about you coming in and selling their house and telling an amazing story about their house, because that's what you're good at, how do they find you, and what would be their next steps?
Super easy. It's www.davidchristensen.com, and we've got all the bells and whistles there and links. I am super approachable. So my phone number, my mobile, my direct email, I'd be more than happy to talk with anybody. And again, I just so appreciate this opportunity to come on with you today, and I'm a big fan of yours, and I appreciate you giving me the time.
Oh, David, it was my pleasure. It was such a great story, man. I really had to think long and hard about how we were going to tell this, but I love it. So, folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, make sure you give us a big solid like, throw a comment up down below, reach out to David, find him online. We'll put the link right in the description so that you can find him a lot easier. But with that being said, folks, thanks for joining us for this episode. And I can't wait to see you on the next version or episode, because we are changing this up. And I just kind of want to see that. Wait till you see what's coming and who we've got lined up, because it's not who you think. Stay tuned. We'll see you on the next one.